So many people get this question wrong. It's annoying. It's kind of one of those cases where we need to understand the passage to really get it. So let's just take a look. Economist Marco Castillo and colleagues show that nuisance costs, the time and effort people must spend to make donations, reduce charitable giving. Charities can mitigate this effect by compensating donors for nuisance costs, but those costs, though variable, are largely blank donation size. So charities that compensate donors will likely favor attracting a few large donors over many small donors. So if we were to really just dumb this down, what stands out most to me is right before the blank, we have like something that's really emphasizing a relationship between the blank, right? They're saying it's, though variable, are largely blank donation size. So it's a weird way of doing this, but basically what they're trying to do is make a contrast. They're saying that in this blank are largely something like not variable, which I know seems so weird because they're like, well, didn't they just say they're variable? Yes, but then what they're trying to say is something kind of related to that, but it's almost like the difference between something being hot and scalding, right? Hot means like the temperature's high. Scalding means it's really going to burn you, right? So to me, I'm getting this more like difference of degree almost, or there's some sort of, kind of like, it's close, but it's still not quite the same definition or the same opposite definition. So not variable, I'm putting that in there because it's simple, but I know in the back of my head that it's not quite accurate. But if we just went by that, maybe we can kind of get the answer here, right? So if something is not variable, right, then maybe it's independent, right? Think about like an independent variable even in math, right? Is it's kind of doing its own thing. It's not dependent on something else. So maybe that's what we're talking about here is it's not it's independent of donation size, meaning that the size of the donation does not affect the cost, but the costs themselves still vary, right? So there could be a high cost and a high nuisance cost, a low one, but it is not dependent upon the size of a donation, whether someone gives $5 or $5 million. That's, I guess, what they're trying to say, and that is the word that is closest to not variable. Supplemental means kind of like something goes with it. You might think of in math, right? If we have two angles on a straight line, those angles are supplementary, right? They kind of add to 180. So that's what supplemental means in a general context, is things kind of go together, fit well together, or kind of like add up together to give like a whole. Predictive of, we know that. So that could fit. It doesn't sound wrong in there, but this is where we would need to understand the passage. So we'll kind of come back to that. Subsumed in is kind of like, I think of like enmeshed in. It's intertwined with. It's mixed in with. It just doesn't fit. It's kind of almost the opposite again of independent. So let's go back into the passage and really kind of get a sense of what they're going for here. This is a tricky passage, right? So there's these nuisance costs. They need to be spent. They reduce the amount of giving, right? Because I guess the more you have to pay, that's just like a credit card fee, the less you're going to pay to donate to the charity. Charities can mitigate, which means lessen. That's a good vocab word to know. Lessen this effect by compensating or paying back donors for nuisance costs, right? So the charities are going to say, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to cover the credit card fee. You're not going to have to pay for it. We will give you that money, or at least we will not charge you for that somehow. But those costs, though variable, right? So some of the costs are high, some of them are low, are largely independent of the donation size, okay? So yes, there could be some high and low nuisance costs, but that is not dependent upon how much someone gives. So if you give a lot, you give a little, that is not going to determine how much that nuisance cost is, which means that it's not going to determine how much the charity is going to compensate you for with that nuisance cost. So it would make sense then that charities are going to compensate donors, that compensate donors will favor attracting a few large donors over many small donors, right? So if you attract a few large donors, you get a lot of money from a few people. And there's not a higher nuisance cost with those large sums of money. But because it's fewer donors, you have to compensate fewer people. You have to pay back fewer nuisance costs because just fewer people that actually got charged that fee, that got charged that cost. So the charity is going to be like, hey, if we want to not have to pay people back, we should have fewer people. So we want people who give a lot of money because they're going to give us a lot, but they're basically not going to take a lot from us with these nuisance costs. That's a lot of thinking. I don't like that. And this is rare for these vocab questions, that we really need to understand the story in this way, but that is kind of what makes this question hard and what we need to do in order to solve it. And it's why choices B and D, and I guess A too, are not right. Because in all three cases, those words would be linking the nuisance costs to the size of the donation, right? So if we said, let's say something like predictive of, the nuisance costs, though variable, are largely predictive of donation size. So that's saying like a high cost, I guess, is going to have a high donation size, but they're saying it's not. It's not the same. So we get that from this N piece where it's like, okay, if the nuisance costs were higher, then why would we want bigger donations? Like it seems like then we'd have bigger costs, right? So again, we need to understand the logic kind of brought in at the end here. Same thing, subsumed in. Subsumed in means that they're kind of like intermixed. And so again, if the nuisance cost and the donation size were connected to each other, there would be some sort of relationship. And then we would, I don't know, again, I would think logically a larger donation would have a larger cost. And so we wouldn't want a larger donation necessarily. Supplemental too, I guess, again, would do the same thing. It would link them up. So yeah, this is a really hard one. They're unlikely to be like this, but this is a real question from the College Board, so it could be. My advice is when you sense that you're not quite understanding the passage, that is a sign that the passage needs to be understood. So I know that's kind of annoying, but like that's the way it goes. It's very easy to just kind of put something in that blank that is like copying or pasting something else from the passage. And I did that a little bit. I still think this part that I highlighted is the first way I answer this question. The main thing I think about as I do it is I'm like, okay, they're trying to tell me in some weird way that it is both variable and somehow not variable or not, I don't know, linked, I guess. And so that little phrasing there I highlighted really does it for me, but I would definitely want to read this passage and understand it on a much more complex level to be absolutely sure that I'm right.